Hello and welcome back to Graff Woodshop. My name is Josh Graff and today we're talking about my workbench here. It's got a couple problems with it. First off, it's really wobbly, not very sturdy. That's a total pain. Second thing, the top on this, it's not flat at all. It's just completely ugly. This thing was actually in the shop when I moved in and I've needed to upgrade this whole time. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to be getting rid of this workbench and getting a new one. First step, get rid of this old one so we can make this new one. Let's get after it.
So this bench is going to be made entirely out of just plywood and MDF. This is based on a plan that originally was in the Fine Woodworking magazine, and I'm actually going to put a link to their plans down in the description below if you want to follow along. First thing I'm doing is just ripping this plywood sheet in half so that it is a lot easier to cut over on the table saw. I'm dealing with a really dull blade on this circular saw, which is giving me fits, but later on I change it out and things get a lot better. But this first cut doesn't need to be too accurate. We're just cutting this thing in half so that we can get it over onto the table saw a lot easier. And now that we're over at the table saw, we are going to be taking this thing and ripping it down into 3.5-inch strips. The whole sheet into 3.5-inch strips. We're going to have a whole lot of them. It's going to take a little while, but we got all evening, so let's get after it. With our second sheet of plywood, I'm actually going to be cutting off the end here. Once again, this doesn't need to be super accurate, though. I've actually ditched the level here that I was using as a straight edge, and I'm just going to use my chalk line, mark it, and cut it freehand, because this doesn't need to be too accurate. We're going to take it over to the table saw later and clean it up anyways. Like I mentioned earlier, if you are interested in these plans for any of the measurements, which I did change quite a few of them just to change up the size of my bench a little bit, the plans will be in the description down below. Also, if you are interested in any of the tools that I'm using today, or you're just wondering what it is I'm using, I will have links to everything down in the description below as well. The larger piece of our cutoff here, I'm once again just kind of cutting it in half just so that it's easier to get over to the table saw. I'm going to use my chalk line again just to mark it because it's much quicker than setting up the level and going about things that way. But this piece is once again going to be a lot more of those 3.5-inch strips we had, so that stack's about to get even bigger. One thing I like when cutting long sheet goods like this is I go ahead and put my push stick on the actual sheet good itself. That way it's right there when I need it and I'm not searching around for it. I'm taking all these sheet goods and cutting down to size. These are going to be both the legs of the table and the stretchers that we're going to have on the table as well. So got my cut list, I'm just working through it, getting everything cut down to length. But big stack of plywood to work through. There are a couple extra pieces of 3.5-inch strips that you have just in case you do make any mistakes, but a lot of cutting right here. Once everything's all cut to length, this is what you're going to end up with. These are my 4 stretchers that are going to be running the long sides of the bench, 2 on top, 2 on bottom, but they're each made out of 3 pieces of the plywood. And here are the 4 legs. Each of them are made out of 5 pieces of the plywood, 2 on each side. In the middle, as you can see, we have 2 mortises. When I go to them up, I will be using a scrap piece of plywood to get those mortises just the right size. And now it's time for glue. So I'm using Type Bond 2 for this project. It holds really well, goes on pretty quick, it's got a good drying time, but a lot of glue for this project. I got a gallon here, and I'm going to be spreading it out quite a bit. Putting that middle part on there that's a little bit longer. These are our stretchers. Putting some glue on the other side. Then I'm just going to be temporarily clamping it in place before I add some screws to really hold it all good together. The glue is really what's going to be holding this thing in place. The screws are really acting more as clamps to hold it permanently. I'm not wanting to leave this thing in clamps because I'm wanting to get on to the next part. I'm using a scrap piece of the cut off plywood just to make sure that I've got everything in the right place and everything's lined up nice and neatly. After the glue had dried, I did run these through the table saw just real quickly. I'm not really taking off anything as far as material goes. It's really just cleaning up the line, taking all the glue squeeze out and cleaning it off, and just making sure that everything's lined up nice and neatly. Not wanting to take off very much material here, just cleaning up the edges. At some point I did lose my footage of gluing together the legs, but they went together really the same way that these stretchers did. Lots of glue, some screws, and then using some cutoffs for getting the mortises to be the right distance apart. I did tape my cutoffs with some packing tape, and that kept the glue from sticking to them. That way I could just leave those scraps in there while everything dried up. But here I am actually assembling the frame. I'm going to be adding 4 screws to each of them. I don't think I get all 4 screws on film here for you guys, but 4 screws into each of these joints so that everything is nice and strong. Giving it a little test here, making sure we're happy with it. Getting a little inspection from Harmony, and everything looks good. So yeah, we're going to put a stretcher in the bottom, and these are really going to be the 2 longer sides. To attach these sides together, we're actually going to use plywood to make the smaller distance of our table. These longer distances are made up of these plywood laminations that we put together. But I did end up putting 4 screws in each of these here to get everything nicely tied together. Most of these joints did need a nice little bit of extra persuasion from the mallet, but they went in together. That's really what you're wanting the fit to be anyways, just so that everything's nice and neat. Using my square to keep making sure that everything is coming out just how it's supposed to. And of course, a battery change as well. Does that ever happen to you right when you're in the middle of something? That seems to be when batteries go dead the most, is right when you're trying to get something done. So now I'm putting in the top stretcher, just doing a little test dry fit first, make sure that everything's good, and then we'll add the glue, add the screws, and get this side all finished up. And of course, nothing is complete without an inspection from Harmony, making sure that I'm doing everything right. And now I'm back over the table saw using that piece of plywood we cut off of our second sheet earlier to make the 2 rectangles that we are going to be using to connect our sides. The longer you make these rectangles, the wider your bench will be. The shorter you make them, the less wide your bench will be. And now I'm putting this rectangle into place that's going to be connecting our two sides together. It does take a little bit of persuasion just to get everything right where it needs to be. I found this easiest to do with the two ends of the table standing up, but quite a bit of persuasion to get everything where it needs to be. I'm just eyeballing everything first, getting it where it looks like everything's lined up pretty good. And then once it looks close, I'm going to get the tape measure out, give it a few extra little whacks to make sure everything's right where it needs to be before I screw it all in place. Now Harmony says it's good, so we're gonna put a few screws in it. Once this is all done, we're going to flip it over and do the same thing with the other side. And now we are on to the top. First thing I'm doing is putting down a sheet of plywood to be the first layer of my top, and then I'm going to be adding a piece of MDF to this as well. I'm going around and putting screws in all the corners first, just to make sure that everything is aligned the way it needs to be, and then we're going to add a lot of screws going down with the stretchers. I put on that first layer at the top, I go ahead and flip it over and add my favorite part of this bench, which is the wheels. It's got some locking casters here that I am putting on. But yeah, very happy with the way these turned out. There is a little bit of extra wiggle in them whenever they're locked, really rotationally. They're not spinning, but they are rotating just a tiny bit when locked. So I'm trying to decide what I want to do there. If you got any comments or suggestions, leave them down in the comment section below. Now I'm cutting this MDF to length. MDF is really nasty to cut, so I suggest you wear a mask when you're doing that. And then I'm just cutting this thing to width as well and cleaning up that nasty dust using my shop vac a little bit. And now I'm attaching the MDF top to the plywood. Notice I didn't glue it or anything. I'm just putting some screws in this. That way if it gets beat up or messed up or whatever, I can just easily take it off, throw a new top on it, and be good to go again. It's really kind of the idea of this MDF top is it's disposable. I can put a different one on if I want to. Now with the cutoff from the piece of MDF, I'm actually going to be making a shelf. So right here I'm just cutting that to length, got my straight edge out, clamped it to the piece of MDF, and just running my circular saw down it real quick. And for coating this thing, I am using shellac. I ended up putting 3 coats of shellac on this. I didn't do the whole bench, all I did was the top and the edges of the MDF top. The rest of it I've just left bare for now. If you got comments on whether you would put shellac on the whole thing or if you do something else, let me know, but I decided just to put shellac on the top of this, mostly because I had some other projects I needed to get to, and I thought the rest of the bench would be fine. The shellac is holding up pretty good. I've spilled a few different things on it, had some glue on it, and everything's cleaned up good so far. It's only been up and running for 2 or 3 weeks now though, so I'll be sure to keep you updated on how this top holds up. Hopefully it holds up for a long time, but we'll see.
Alright, so we're all finished up now. There are a few things I am thinking about upgrading and changing on this as we go forward, but I want to work with it a little bit first. The first thing is these wheels. I love the wheels. You can roll it around, but they do add just a little bit of a wobble to them because while they are locking casters and they lock, they don't roll, they still will rotate and twist just a very tiny amount. There's just a little bit of play in it there, and that does put just a little bit of a wobble into it. Okay, so that's one thing I might fix. The second thing is I want to add either a second shelf or a drawer down here below, and I can't decide what I want to do, so I'm going to leave it as is for now while I'm thinking about that. A couple other little things. I might want to add a magnetic bar to this like I have behind me here to hang some stuff on. I really find those handy. So I'm trying to decide where I want to put that or if I'm just going to use these magnetic bars behind me. And then last thing I want to do is maybe add a power strip to this. I need better electrical plugins over here, and I'm adding either a power strip to this bench behind me or my bench right here. I haven't decided which one yet. So I want to work with this bench for a couple of months first and then make those little tweaks. If you want to see how I upgrade this thing in the future, go ahead and subscribe. So hopefully here in a few months we'll be making some little tweaks, some little modifications after I've worked with this thing for a while and seen what I like and what I don't like. So thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.